This is the story of a man who turned breaking out of prison into an art form in Australia. A man with escape skills so extraordinary that he managed to break free from some of the most secure prisons in the country. From cutting through iron bars to picking locks and soaring through prison transport vehicles, he dodged captivity repeatedly. This is the story of Darcy Ezekiel Dugan. Darcy Ezekiel Dugan was born on August 29, 1920, in Newton, an inner suburb of Sydney. He and his family moved up the road to Annandale, where he spent most of his childhood and began his criminal life early. His father worked as a bricklayer and hailed from Victoria, while his mother was a devout Irish Catholic born in New South Wales. The Dugans raised Darcy in keeping with their strong religious beliefs and working-class roots. As a young boy, at the age of 10 years old, Darcy started displaying a liking for mischief and law-breaking. He began shoplifting and committing petty thefts around Annandale with his group of schoolmates that included his friend Lenny McPherson. A few years later, at the age of 13, Darcy developed a skill for lockpicking and would break into houses and businesses. He'd steal cosmetics from the Grace Bros department store and secretly sell the goods to Tilly Devine, the well-known owner of high-class brothels in the city. His first major run-in with the law came in 1937 at age 17 when he was caught stealing from his uncle's hotel. For this crime, the young Darcy was sent away to the Gosford Farm home for boys. This place lived up to its harsh reputation. It was a violent and depressing lockup for juvenile delinquents. But Darcy didn't plan on sticking around for long. At the farm home, he plotted his first escape with another teenage inmate as his partner in crime. The two boys managed to break out successfully and went on the run together, staying hidden for 3 whole weeks. They hopped a freight train and headed into town with no money or food. A local police officer noticed something odd about the scruffy, hungry teenagers as their boots had prison numbers carved into them. The boys confessed they were escapees from the Gosford Juvenile Facility and they were hauled right back to face punishment. At the age of 18, Darcy pleaded guilty to 96 separate break-ins, which helped him become an expert at picking locks and blowing open safes. He hardly ever encountered a locking device that he couldn't beat, and by the age of 21, he had already served 5 sentences at some of Australia's toughest prisons. After his release from Oberon Prison, Darcy was drafted into the army for service during World War II, and on June 2, 1942, he was posted to Kara to train as a sapper, but just within a month, he abandoned his post without permission. While on the run, he roamed the Sydney suburbs, taking advantage of his lockpicking skills, which would eventually get him caught and imprisoned again. He was sentenced to 2 years of imprisonment, and he was discharged from the army the same day. After his release in 1945, he would lead a double life. During the night, he would continue breaking into buildings, and during the day, he would be teaching ballroom dancing all around Sydney for some extra money. However, just a year later, in 1946, Darcy and an accomplice were arrested for a burglary and were being transported in a vehicle to Burwood Police Station. Darcy transformed a kitchen knife into a screwdriver, unfastened the wire mesh in the van, and climbed through the gap. He didn't end up running for long as he was recaptured again at gunpoint in Annandale. Just a few months after his capture, Darcy was in a group of 30 prisoners that were being transported inside of a tram from Long Bay Jail to a police station in Darlinghurst. During the ride, he managed to cut a hole inside of the tram with a serrated knife that he had stolen from a prison while one of the prisoners caused a distraction. He then squeezed himself through the hole with another prisoner and made a break for it, managing to evade arrest for 36 hours before they were found dehydrated and starving. Newspaper coverage labeled the escape as sensational and daring, naming Darcy as Houdini. At this point, he had already escaped prison twice, and he was sentenced to 3.5 years in Bathurst Jail for the tram incident. On his release in 1949, he changed his name to Darcy Clare, moved in with his father, took a job in a warehouse, and began saving for a truck. He planned on living his life like a normal citizen this time around, but that didn't last long. In August 1949, he was remanded in custody to Long Bay Jail after a failed robbery with a fellow criminal, William Mears. Within half an hour of their arrival at Long Bay, the pair had picked a lock, removed a section of the roof in one of the toilets, scaled 2 walls, and caught a tram to escape into the city. Another manhunt followed, and they were soon recaptured in a hideout at Lugano. Darcy and Mears each received a 10-year sentence. However, they weren't planning on staying there for too long, because in December that year, the pair would break out again out of the Central Police Court. Darcy asked Mears to call him as a witness in another matter, which meant that the pair would would be transported from the prison to a holding cell at the Central Court. While Mears was appearing in court, Darcy used a hacksaw blade threaded between his shoulder blades to saw through the bars of their holding cell. When Mears was placed back into the cell, the pair squeezed through the already hacked bar, climbed to the roof, and slid down a pipe outside of the walls. Even after that escape, Darcy would find himself in another failed robbery. On January 13, 1950, Darcy and Mears robbed the Ultimo branch of the Commonwealth Bank of Australia while on the run. The robbery became bloody when Mears shot and injured the bank teller. They escaped in a getaway car, abandoned it, and then waited until they were picked up by Darcy's childhood friend, Lenny McPherson. 2 months later, an informant betrayed their hideaway house in Coleroy, and both Darcy and Mears would be arrested again. As you probably already know, Darcy was prepared and had yet another escape plan up his sleeve. He made an impression in wet bread of a handcuff lock, fashioned a flat key from his belt buckle, and hid it in his mouth. In Central Court in May 1950, he undid his handcuffs and made a run for it, smashing through a glass panel door before being immediately recaptured again. The bank robbery landed Darcy and Mears on death row, but a stroke of luck saved them. In 1950, a law change commuted their sentences to life imprisonment after Labour's victory in the state election. However, Darcy's luck was short-lived as he found himself in Grafton Jail, notorious for its violent environment and also known as the Bloodhouse. Just 9 months later, Darcy soared through the bars of his cell to try and escape, but he got caught. The next year, Darcy pretended to be insane by not eating or washing himself. He became very thin. This got him moved to Long Bay Prison for a little while, where they force-fed him, but then they sent him right back to the harsh Grafton prison. Using a steel thimble, Darcy made a key and unlocked his cell door. But again, he was caught trying to escape, and as punishment, he was put in solitary confinement. In 1953, Darcy planned for a dozen prisoners to escape together after leaving the prison chapel, but their attempt failed. It seemed as if none of Darcy's escape plans were working anymore. In 1957, Darcy was sent to Parramatta Jail and met George Freeman, who told him that Lenny McPherson, known as Mr. Big, was now a police informant who betrayed Darcy. After guards found Darcy hiding under a shed in the prison garden, they sent him back to the harsh Grafton Jail. While there, Darcy studied the famous escape artist Houdini and practiced swallowing and regurgitating knives and forks to help him escape. In 1960, he went to Long Bay Prison, but then kept getting moved between different prisons like Grafton, Tumbarumba, Parramatta, Bathurst, and back to Long Bay. Finally, in 1967, the authorities secretly let Darcy out of prison at night. Once free, he sold his life story to a newspaper and bought a house from his old accomplice, Harry Mitchell. Darcy then worked as a counselor at the Wayside Chapel, wrote a play, and acted in a 1969 prison-themed stage production called Fortune and Men's Eyes. He also began campaigning against police corruption and brutality in jails. His evidence to the Royal Commission into New South Wales prisons led to significant changes in the treatment of inmates. However, all of this was short-lived as he was arrested again for a jewelry store robbery in 1969 and sentenced to 14 years, which he spent alternately at Maitland Jail and Long Bay. After being released in 1980, he went on to marry Jan Simmons, the sister of prison escapee Kevin Simmons, who, like Darcy, had been pursued and recaptured. Both of them would soon split up but remained friends. In 1981, Darcy found accommodation at Glebe House, a halfway facility for those who had served time, but his stay was short. He needed money, so he took part in an aborted service station robbery and was jailed again. He spent about 4 years in jail. When he was released in 1985, Darcy's health took a turn when he suffered a debilitating stroke that significantly impacted his health. He returned to the Glebe House, but his health continued to decline as he developed Parkinson's disease. As the disease progressed, he was eventually moved to a nursing home where he spent his final years. Though his physical abilities were diminished, he remained active by painting, and several of his artworks were even auctioned at an exhibition. Darcy Ezekiel Dugan passed away on August 22, 1991, at the age of 70.